A new national poll released today shows the only Republican in a dead heat with President Obama is Newt Gingrich. Yes, that Newt Gingrich. Newt Gingrich officially announced his presidential campaign only 6 days ago. On that day, I asked how soon he would drop out of the race. I did not have the audacity to imagine that his campaign would not last a week. It is now functionally over for Gingrich. He will linger in our midst. He will have enough money to continue traveling for months, and if he so chooses, actually wait for some votes to be counted in Iowa, New Hampshire, or even South Carolina. Well, the Republican presidential roller coaster has suddenly turned up this week for Newt Gingrich. He is, as of this moment, in some polls, one of the front runners for the Republican nomination. In the new McClatchy-Marist poll, President Obama has 47% to Gingrich's 45%. That's within the margin of error. By comparison, the president is beating Mitt Romney 48% to 44%. And a Fox News poll released tonight shows Gingrich leading the Republican pack. Gingrich has 23%. Romney struggling now at 22%. Herman Cain has 15%. Everyone else in single digits. And now, as soon as Gingrich's candidacy has shot up in the polls, he is, of course, mired in a controversy involving his work for mortgage giant Freddie Mac after Bloomberg News broke the story this morning that Newt Gingrich made between $1.6 million and $1.8 million in consulting fees from two contracts with mortgage company Freddie Mac between 1999 and 2007. At the CNBC debate last week, Gingrich was asked about a portion of that money.
Speaker Gingrich, 30 seconds to you. Your firm was paid $300,000 by Freddie Mac in 2006. What did you do for that money?
I have never done any lobbying. Every contract that was written during the period when I was out of the office specifically said I would do no lobbying, and I offered advice. And my advice as a historian, when they walked in and said to me, we are now making loans to people who have no credit history and have no record of paying back anything, but that's what the government wants us to do. As I said to them at the time, this is a bubble. This is insane. This is impossible. It turned out, unfortunately, I was right.
Yesterday, Gingrich offered a defense of government-sponsored enterprises like Freddie Mac, but he had to reach back 142 years ago to do so.
Government-sponsored enterprises, which includes the Transcontinental Railroad, has a long history of being fairly successful. That doesn't mean with bad management and with bad ideas it can't be a failure. But in the long run, it's actually been a useful model for the country overall. What I tried to do over and over again with folks was offer strategic advice to whatever they were dealing with. But I did no lobbying of any kind.
Who's the last candidate you heard mention the Transcontinental Railroad? The guy's a historian. What do you want? Today, Gingrich moved one step closer to admitting that he actually was, in effect, a lobbyist.
Is the 1.6 million figure correct?
I don't know. We're going back to check.
It sounds like a whole lot more than just being a historian, though.
Well, look, I was Speaker of the House and a strategic advisor.
Bloomberg detailed exactly what Freddie Mac hired Gingrich for. He was paid a self-renewing monthly retainer of $25,000 to $30,000 between May 1999 until 2002. During that period, Gingrich consulted with Freddie Mac executives on a program to expand home ownership, an idea Freddie Mac's chief lobbyist, Mitchell Delk, said he pitched to President George W. Bush's White House. And an Associated Press report published this afternoon added he was hired to strategize with his employer about identifying political friends on Capitol Hill who would help the company through a very difficult legislative environment. In other words, he was a lobbyist. In the Meet the Press weekly press pass, David Gregory asked Washington's most corrupt lobbyist of our time, Jack Abramoff, to clarify what he thinks Gingrich was really doing.
It is corruption. Any provision of favor or any provision of anything to members of Congress and their staff is bribery, and any cashing in on it by them coming out later is corruption.
And you would make the case that he's cashing in as a former speaker, being able to get that kind of contract.
I know he says that they paid him as a historian to give him a historic lesson, but I'm unaware of any history professor being paid that much money to give somebody a history lesson.
Joining me now are Rich Galen, a veteran Republican strategist and former Gingrich press secretary, and Chris Hayes, editor-at-large for The Nation and host of Up with Chris Hayes, airing weekend mornings on MSNBC. Thank you both for joining me.
Thank you.
Chris, in Washington, these kind of revolving accounts of $30,000 a month are paid to lobbyists. That is exactly how they're paid.
And it's a totally corrupt practice. Everybody knows about it. And more than that, I mean, what I think is so funny is a lot of times they don't do a whole lot to earn that money. What they are doing is they are buying essentially the endorsement, the imprimatur of someone. They are essentially getting someone who's powerful and well-connected on their good side. And this was something Freddie Mac knew how to do very well. I mean, Rahm Emanuel was on their board. They were very good at sort of cultivating these relationships, and Republicans for so long have delighted in calling attention to the corrupt connections between Democrats and Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, because to them it's this perfect sort of ideological story about how the government created the housing bubble. And here we turn around and here's Mr. ideologically pure Newt Gingrich, the seer who sees all, who's essentially on the take with this same enterprise.
Rich Galen, welcome back to the table to discuss your former boss.
You two guys sound like Captain Renault, shocked to find out that there's gambling done. This is Washington, D.C. This isn't the Vatican. This is what people do. If we stopped former members of the House and Senate or administrations, both parties, from doing exactly what Newt did, which was not lobbying, by the way. As you know very well, Lawrence, in Washington, lobbying has a fairly specific meaning, and this is not it. But if we stop them from doing that, first of all, the unemployment rate would go up to 10% because so many are doing it. And secondly, our parking problems would be over.
Rich, I do define it as lobbying. I know what you're saying. There is a task that is the registered lobbyist, and a lot of these guys, especially the most high-profile former senators, majority leaders and minority leaders, when they leave, they say we're not lobbying, but they go into a firm that does lobby and they open the doors for them. They get them the appointments, and then they don't go to the appointments. It's all lobbying, Rich, the way I see it.
But it's not, Lawrence. Anyway, let's put that aside.
Okay.
Let's pretend it is. But even at that, as you know, because you've spent a lot of time in this town, a $25,000 a month contract for somebody like Gingrich or his equal and opposite in the Senate, Republican or Democrat, that's a fairly typical number for these guys to have.
Yeah.
And when I heard the $1.6 million, I went, wow, that's a hell of a contract. But it turns out it was over 5 years, so it's $20 or $25,000 a month. Certainly nothing to sneeze at. But in this town, it is also nothing that stops somebody and says, wow,
no
that's amazing.
one up here is sneezing at it.
Can I just make an argument for us to reclaim our sense of outrage, right? I mean, the whole problem is that this has become so routinized. We've become so accustomed to it, and the corruption is so endemic and so widespread.
What was the corruption? I don't understand the corruption part. I mean, I know Jack Abramoff said it, and he knows a little something about that. But I'm lost in the corruption charge.
This is a government-sponsored enterprise that is essentially using.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't a government. It was assumed to be government-sponsored. But you know better than that. Go ahead.
The Freddie Mac.
Yeah.
Of course, it was a government-sponsored enterprise.
No. It was a government-chartered enterprise, but it wasn't a government-sponsored. It was a private company chartered by the government.
Right. It's a GSE. That's how we refer to them. The point being that this was forget it. Let's say it's a private company entirely. The point is that there's a fundamental improper dependence that happens when people are able to leave public life and cash out and then use their access that they obtained in public life to essentially negotiate favorable policies for companies and people that have a lot of money because they could write big checks. There's something that's fundamentally corrupting about that system. If you don't think that's
being corrupted, I don't understand.
The entire legislative process,
the founders thick about this. I just don't get it.
Okay, the founders, right, wanted our elected representatives to be dependent solely on the people, right? They did not want them essentially to be shills for large, rich enterprises that could essentially purchase favored policies through the distribution of self-re-upping $25,000 monthly contracts.
Newt doesn't have a vote. Tom Daschle doesn't have a vote anymore.
So you're saying it was completely ineffectual. So it was the whole thing.
If they were ineffectual, they wouldn't get paid. But I think Article 1, Section 1 of Article 1 of the First Amendment gives
to petition and lobby, absolutely,
the right to petition for redress of grievances, and that is a function that's guaranteed by the Constitution. You may not like it. I wish somebody would pay me $25,000 a month. I would petition the hell out of them.
Rich, keep your phone open. The calls will come. Let's just. We're not going to come to an agreement on this. Look, when I was in a position, as you know, Rich, in the Senate, where if I had wanted to go and become a lobbyist, I could have actually become richer at that than anything else I pursued. I consider Washington lobbying in its current form fundamentally corrupt. We're not going to agree on that. I think it's a filthy and corrupt business. But let's move on to where Newt Gingrich is tonight, which, Rich, you and I have to be a little bit surprised at this. I want to show a tape of one of our discussions earlier in the year about the candidacy of Newt Gingrich. Let's listen
180
to this.
degrees wrong.
Let's listen. Rich, first of all, my condolences. I know how it must feel to have gone through this. Something has gone terribly, terribly wrong. Did you imagine that it could go this wrong for Newt so fast? I know this is a difficult train wreck for you to watch. Thanks for joining us,
I really
Rich.
like Newt, and I wish him well, but this is a tough road.
Rich, I'm sorry for your loss, I believe, is the phrase in these situations.
But this is really a sad way for a really brilliant campaign, a brilliant career to come to an end. Gingrich thought he had one more fight in him. He didn't even have 2 rounds in him, it turned out.
Is there anything other than working on the withdrawal speech?
I don't even think there's going to be a speech. You know,
Rich,
I only have 3 ties, and now you've seen them all.
Rich, how long will the Gingrich bubble last?
Given what we've seen over the last 4 or 5 months, I give it 2.5, 3 weeks. But as you saw, we were both wrong about Newt before. Newt is a perseverer, if there's such a word. He did that when he was trying to take over control of the House. He spent 10 or 12 years at it, not 10 or 12 hours at it. So he'll just stay in this thing until there's no reason to stay in it anymore. I don't see how he gets there. I think Romney will probably be the Republican nominee. But, God bless him. I mean, he stuck this out. Everybody else fell by the wayside. And as you pointed out, the latest poll has him actually ahead.
Chris Hayes, quickly, how much life left in the Gingrich bubble? It just started.
I'm curious to see the candidate who wants to be the anti-Romney has to watch their right flank. And I think the Fannie Freddie story, in the conservative imagination, Fannie Freddie is what caused the crisis. Mm-hmm. And so the fact that he was on the payroll of the entity that they say caused the crisis, I think is going to give him a problem.
The bubble's already in trouble. Rich Galen and Chris Hayes, thank you both very much for joining me tonight.
Good seeing you guys.